Welcome to Shutterscape, brave souls, to the realm of the unknown. Here, in the heart of darkness, we unravel the chilling tales that lurk in the shadows. Stories that will grip your imagination and chill you to the core. Prepare yourself for spine-tingling narratives that delve into the depths of fear, where every whisper holds a secret and every shadow conceals a terror. Join our community of thrill seekers as we explore the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. But remember, once you enter, there's no turning back. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, so you never miss a moment of our haunting adventures. Are you ready to embrace the fear? The darkness awaits. The fog sat heavy and thick over the green hills of County Clare as Eamon drove, his fingers clenching the wheel tighter than necessary. Beside him, Siobhan was gazing out the window, her eyes bright with excitement. She'd insisted they spend the weekend at the family estate, an ancient stone manor abandoned after the death of Eamon's father. And it was a place Eamon would have preferred to leave undisturbed. But Siobhan was insistent, curious about their Irish heritage and the strange stories of a woman heard wailing on the moors. They reached the manor just before dusk. The walls of the stone structure were crumbling in places, overrun by ivy, and the windows were shattered, gaping like hollow eyes. Inside, the air was cold and musty, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decay. Siobhan shivered, though she brushed it off as Eamon ushered her inside, reluctant to linger in the looming twilight. "Remember," Eamon said, "we're here for one night only. Tomorrow we head back." As they settled in, Siobhan brought out a notebook, brimming with tales of Irish lore she'd jotted down over the years. "They say there's a banshee attached to our family," she whispered to Eamon that evening, a gleam of excitement mingling with trepidation in her eyes. Eamon dismissed it with a laugh, though his own laughter seemed oddly hollow in the vast, silent room. "Banshees are tales told to frighten children," he said, ignoring the uncomfortable twist in his stomach. But as the night deepened, something shifted in the air, a palpable unspoken tension. Just after midnight, a low keening floated on the wind. Eamon paused, trying to place the source. The sound, distant yet chilling, slipped under doors and through walls. He wanted to dismiss it, yet his hands shook slightly as he closed the heavy drapes over the drafty windows. "Did you hear that?" Siobhan asked, her voice wavering. "Wind on the moor," he replied, though he did not believe it. The sound grew louder as the night wore on, threading itself through the manor's dark corridors, slipping between walls, closer with each passing hour. It was like a song, a mournful, bone-chilling tune that set their nerves on edge. Eamon lay awake, feeling as if the sound was calling specifically for him, its melody seeping into his mind and drawing out old memories he'd long buried. Finally, unable to bear the suspense, Eamon stepped into the hallway. A draft swept through the manor, cold and unnatural. It bore a faint scent of damp moss and bog water, and Eamon thought he caught a glimpse of white slipping past the edge of his vision, trailing like mist down the staircase. "Eamon," Siobhan whispered, appearing behind him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "There's nothing there," he insisted. But when he looked again, the faintest outline of a woman seemed to linger at the edge of the shadows. A figure in white, her back turned as she descended the stairs, leaving behind an air heavy with sorrow. Driven by a force he could not explain, Eamon followed the figure, his heart pounding, his limbs cold as ice. The figure moved slowly, as if she were gliding. The mournful song grew louder, and he could almost make out words, Old Irish, a language he barely understood, yet instinctively recognized. They reached the cellar door, a place Eamon had never entered in all his years visiting the manor. The figure descended into the darkness below, and Eamon felt compelled to follow, despite the frigid cold seeping from the depths. Down in the cellar, the woman in white stood facing him. Her face was pale, translucent, her hair flowing like seaweed in water. Her eyes met his, deep pools of sorrow, reflecting centuries of suffering. And then she spoke, her voice echoing in his mind. "Do you not know me, Eamon?" she asked, her voice soft as wind over reeds. He felt his heart seize. Memories flooded his mind. Legends his father had told him as a boy about a woman wronged by his ancestors, a spirit tied to their family line as both a protector and a harbinger of death. She was the Banshee, the foreteller of doom. "The family," she said, "cursed to be warned before each soul passes. I come to prepare for a death close at hand." Siobhan, having followed him into the cellar, gasped, her face paling. The Banshee's gaze turned to her, and a flicker of sadness crossed her ghostly face. "It is not for you, child," she said softly, "but one you love." Eamon's blood ran cold, and he staggered back. He knew then why the Banshee had come. She was here to signal his own passing. The tales had been true, and his heart felt the weight of centuries of sorrow bound to his family line. As if understanding his thoughts, the Banshee nodded. Her song resumed, echoing against the stone walls of the cellar, growing louder, pressing against him like a physical force. He clutched his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow, a dull ache spreading through him. "You cannot escape your bloodline, nor the sins of those who came before," she murmured. Eamon, weakened, collapsed to his knees, his life force seeming to drain with each haunting note of her song. Siobhan rushed to his side, but her efforts were in vain. The Banshee's song held him, pulling him closer to the edge between life and death. As if understanding his thoughts, the Banshee nodded. Her song resumed, echoing against the stone walls of the cellar, growing louder, pressing against him like a physical force. He clutched his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow, a dull ache spreading through him. "You cannot escape your bloodline, nor the sins of those who came before," she murmured. Eamon, weakened, collapsed to his knees, his life force seeming to drain with each haunting note of her song. Siobhan rushed to his side, but her efforts were in vain. The Banshee's song held him, pulling him closer to the edge between life and death. The keening on the wind holds the chilling essence of Irish folklore, blending the Banshee's eerie presence with the family curse. The story unravels the mystery of a harbinger's song, tying together ancient myth and present-day characters. Through this journey, Eamon's skepticism is shattered, and his fate fulfilled, leaving behind the haunting legacy of his bloodline. Aisling's grandmother's cottage was perched alone on the rugged cliffs of Donegal, overlooking the tumultuous waves that crashed against the rocks below. Aisling hadn't visited since she was a child, when her mother would bring her here for long summers filled with ghost stories and songs about fairies and lost souls. But her grandmother's recent death had left the cottage empty, and Aisling had come back only to sell it. As she stepped inside, memories flooded her mind, memories of warmth, of her grandmother's laughter, and of the peculiar warnings that she'd given Aisling all her life. "Remember, girl," her grandmother would say, her eyes dark and serious, "the Banshee's wail isn't a tale. She comes for us, and only for us." Aisling shrugged off the memories as old superstitions, relics of a different time. But the silence in the cottage felt different now, heavier, as if the walls were waiting, watching. As dusk approached, she locked up the cottage and decided to visit the nearby pub to ask around about local buyers. The pub was dimly lit, filled with locals who gave her curious glances as she walked in. She settled at the bar, ordering a pint, when an old fisherman named Finn approached her. "Back in the old cottage, are ye?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "Only for a while," Aisling replied. "Just until I can sell it." Finn shook his head, his eyes distant. "Your grandmother wouldn't like that. That cottage, it belongs to your family. And there's more to it than you'd care to know, I reckon." When Aisling rolled her eyes, Finn's face grew serious. He leaned in, his voice a whisper. "Don't mock the Banshee, girl. She's watched over your kin longer than you know. She comes when death is near. For someone in the family." Aisling brushed it off as an old man's rambling, but a chill crept up her spine all the same. That night, back at the cottage, Aisling tried to sleep, but something kept her awake, a strange, restless energy that seemed to pulse from the very walls. She turned over in bed, pulling the old quilt tighter, but it was no use. The darkness felt alive. Then, just as she was about to drift off, a sound cut through the silence, a wailing cry, high and mournful, that sent shivers down her spine. She sat up, listening intently, trying to tell herself it was the wind. But the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, an eerie melody echoing across the moors, filling her with a deep, nameless dread. Grabbing a flashlight, Aisling moved to the window, peering into the night. In the distance, under the faint glow of the moon, she saw a figure on the moors, a woman draped in shadow, her hair streaming in the wind, her face hidden in darkness. Aisling's breath caught. The figure raised her head, and even from the distance, Aisling could feel her gaze. She stumbled back from the window, her heart pounding. By morning, she tried to convince herself it had been a dream, a trick of the mind brought on by the old stories. But the image of the shadowy woman lingered, and when she went into town, Finn noticed the pale look on her face. "Ye saw her, didn't ye?" he asked, his tone grim. Aisling only nodded, reluctant to admit that anything had truly happened. "She'll come again," Finn warned. "She always does. But there's only one way to end it." He refused to explain further, and Aisling left the pub feeling more unsettled than ever. The following night, the cry returned louder and closer. Aisling felt it resonating through the walls, filling the cottage with its dreadful song. This time, the sound seemed to call to her, pulling her from her bed and out onto the moors, the flashlight clutched tightly in her hand. The night was cold and silent, save for the wailing that guided her across the dark landscape. As she approached the cliff edge, the figure materialized again, her outline hazy, yet unmistakable. Her face was obscured, but her voice, soft and sorrowful, reached Aisling's ears. "Do you know why I am here?" the woman asked. Aisling, shivering, shook her head. "I come for the Morrigan blood," the figure intoned. "Each time one of your kin nears death, I am bound to return, to mourn and to claim. It is the curse of my grief, my endless sorrow." Aisling tried to speak, but her voice failed her. The banshee continued. "Your family brought ruin to my own, and in their greed, they bound me to them. Until the last Morrigan bloodline dies, I will remain." Aisling finally found her voice. "But my grandmother, she said you watched over us." "I do," the banshee replied, "for I am bound by blood. Yet it is a cursed bond, and until you end it, I shall come for each of you one by one." In that moment, Aisling realized what the banshee was asking. To break the curse, she would have to let the cottage, their family's legacy, be reclaimed by the earth. It was the last remaining piece of the past that kept the banshee tethered. The banshee held out her hand, her gaze fixed on Aisling with a fierce sadness. "Will you end it, child?" Aisling hesitated, feeling the weight of her family's legacy heavy on her shoulders. But the wail had haunted her for 2 nights now, and the thought of it following her, of her children and grandchildren hearing it one day, chilled her to her very core. "Yes," she whispered, "I'll let it go." The banshee's form wavered, a faint smile breaking through her sorrow. Her song softened, echoing one last time across the moors, as she began to fade. "Thank you," the spirit murmured, her voice barely a whisper on the wind. "May your kin be free." In the days that followed, Aisling put the cottage up for sale, making it clear that it was to be left untouched, a relic of the past meant to fade with time. She returned to Dublin, the memory of the banshee lingering, but her heart lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted. Yet even after the cottage was sold and the new owners let the land reclaim it, Aisling occasionally thought she heard a faint wail on the wind. Perhaps it was only the memory of that haunting cry, or perhaps the banshee was truly gone. Either way, she was free. The Last Light of the Moors captures the ominous beauty of Irish folklore, exploring the power of ancestral ties and the haunting legacy of family curses. Through Aisling's journey, we witness the eerie presence of the banshee and the price of breaking an age-old curse. This tale leaves the reader with a lingering sense of the supernatural, as the banshee's song fades, leaving only silence and mystery behind. It was twilight when Declan arrived at his late grandmother's cottage in the rolling hills of County Kerry. The cottage sat alone on a grassy knoll, its stone walls shadowed by an ancient twisted oak tree. Declan could almost imagine his grandmother in her younger days, sitting by the hearth, hands working yarn while tales of fairies and banshees slipped from her lips like smoke. But he hadn't come to linger over memories. He was here to settle affairs, sort through her belongings, and head back to Dublin by the end of the week. But one item caught his eye almost immediately. A harp, weathered yet elegant, sat beside the old stone fireplace, its strings dusty and silent. Declan felt a strange compulsion to touch it, to bring it to life, even though he had only seen his grandmother play it once as a child. That harp was her legacy, said Maeve, Declan's cousin, appearing in the doorway. She said it was bound to our family in some way. Legend says that when someone in the family is about to die, it plays on its own. They say the banshee herself can be heard singing through its strings. Declan shook his head with a chuckle. More village tales, Maeve? But Maeve's gaze was somber. You can laugh if you want, but that harp's got a history. They say it's older than any of us can remember, and that it's cursed. That night, Declan tossed and turned, unable to sleep. As the wind howled outside, he thought he heard a faint melody, gentle and sorrowful, seeping through the walls. He sat up, straining his ears, convinced he was imagining things. But the sound grew clearer, an eerie tune drifting up the staircase from the cottage's parlor, where the harp sat. Slowly, Declan crept down the stairs, his heart pounding as he approached the parlor door. He hesitated before pushing it open, half expecting to find someone else there. The harp sat alone, untouched, yet the strings were faintly vibrating, as though recently played. Declan stood frozen, watching as the strings stilled. The room was deathly quiet. The next morning, he tried to brush it off as a dream, but Maeve noticed his pallor. "You heard it, didn't you?" she asked, a glint of fearful curiosity in her eyes. Declan brushed it off, refusing to give in to his cousin's superstitions. But over the next few nights, the eerie melody returned, clearer each time, weaving through the house like a mournful spirit. It would start as a gentle hum, then grow into a lament that seemed to pull at Declan's heart, filling him with an inexplicable sorrow. Finally, on the third night, as the melody filled the air once more, Declan couldn't ignore it. He rushed down to the parlor, determined to put an end to whatever trick his mind was playing on him. This time, as he entered the room, he wasn't alone. A figure stood beside the harp, a woman with long, silver hair flowing like a river, her face hidden in shadow. Her hands hovered over the harp strings, which seemed to glow under her touch. She turned to face him, her eyes sorrowful, her mouth open in a silent cry. Declan felt rooted to the spot, his heart racing as he met the gaze of the banshee. The banshee's voice broke through the silence, soft and haunting, as she began to sing, her lament intertwining with the harp's strange melody. The sorrow in her voice seemed to pierce Declan's heart, filling him with an ancient grief he couldn't understand. "Why are you here?" he whispered, barely able to find his voice. The banshee's voice was a whisper, as if carried on the wind itself. "I come for the Morrigans. Bound I am, to mourn each one, for the blood debt they owe." Declan's mind raced, recalling fragments of his grandmother's stories. The Morrigans, his ancestors, had wronged a family long ago, leading to a curse. The banshee was bound to follow their lineage, marking each death with her mournful song. "Break the curse," Declan pleaded, feeling his throat tighten. "Please let my family go." The banshee tilted her head, her eyes full of sorrow. "The curse cannot be broken by the living, unless they pay the price." Declan swallowed, understanding the weight of her words. If he was to break the curse, he would need to offer his own life in exchange, freeing the Morrigan family from their eternal bond with the banshee. As the banshee's song continued, Declan felt a strange calm wash over him. In that moment, he made his choice. "If my life will end this, then take it," he said, his voice steady. "Let my family be free." The banshee's gaze softened, and she reached out, touching his forehead with a hand that felt like ice. "The blood of the Morrigans runs deep," she murmured. "With your offering, I am bound no more." As her hand touched him, Declan's vision blurred, his strength draining as the banshee's song wrapped around him, pulling him deeper into her mournful tune. His last memory was of the harp strings vibrating one final time, a solemn goodbye as he drifted away. When morning came, Maeve found Declan in the parlor, slumped beside the harp, his face peaceful. The harp lay silent, its strings still, and the house felt lighter, as though a burden had finally lifted. Maeve buried Declan in the family cemetery, and from that day on, the banshee's song was never heard again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind swept across the moors, Maeve thought she heard a faint, distant melody, a reminder of Declan's sacrifice and the end of the curse that had haunted their family for generations. In the harp's last lament, the tale of the banshee unfolds through a haunting melody, passed down from one generation to the next. Declan's journey unveils the sorrow and sacrifice woven into his family's history, culminating in his selfless decision to break the curse. The story ends on a note of both sadness and peace, as the Morrigan family is finally freed, leaving only echoes of the Banshee's lament on the wind. The mist clung to the rolling hills as Niamh approached the remote village in County Mayo. After her father's death, she had thrown herself into her work, seeking solace in the ancient stories he had passed on to her as a child. When she heard of a newly uncovered stone circle on a remote farm, she felt drawn to it, as though the past itself were calling her. As she arrived at the site, the wind swept through the tall grass, carrying with it a faint, mournful whisper. The stones stood in a perfect circle, old and moss-covered, watching silently over the land like ghostly sentinels. Niamh felt a shiver as she approached, but she shook it off, attributing it to the eerie beauty of the sight. Podrick, the land's owner, watched her from a distance, his expression grim. "Those stones have always been here, Miss Niamh," he said, his voice low. "Folks say they're cursed. Anyone with the O'Sullivan blood," he gestured to her, "should think twice about digging here." Niamh raised an eyebrow, brushing his concerns aside. "My father was O'Sullivan. I'm only here to study the stones, Podrick, not to break any curses." Podrick shook his head, casting a wary glance at the circle. "Your father knew the stories. The Banshee cries for the O'Sullivans, they say, especially when they wander too close to the old magic." Niamh laughed nervously, but Podrick's words left a trace of unease in her mind. For years, she'd dismissed such tales, but her father's recent passing had made her feel strangely vulnerable. Still, her curiosity outweighed her caution, and she set up her equipment near the stones, determined to uncover their secrets. As dusk fell, Niamh felt the air grow colder, the shadows lengthening around the stones. She was making notes on the unusual carvings etched into the rock when she heard it, the faintest of whispers, threading through the air like a distant murmur. She paused, listening intently, but the sound faded, leaving only silence. "Podrick's stories are getting to me," she muttered to herself, trying to laugh it off. But as she turned back to her work, the whispering resumed, louder this time. It wasn't the sound of wind or rustling leaves. It was a voice soft and mournful calling her name. Niamh. Her heart pounded as she looked around, but she saw nothing save the looming stones and the encroaching mist. She gathered her equipment quickly, deciding to return in the morning. But just as she was about to leave, she glimpsed a shadow near the largest stone. A figure draped in a shroud of mist, her hair long and wild, her face pale as moonlight. The figure's gaze pierced her, filled with an ancient sorrow that sent chills down her spine. She ran, feeling the weight of that gaze pressing on her, the whispering voice echoing in her ears long after she left the circle behind. That night, Niamh lay in bed, unable to sleep. She couldn't shake the image of the figure by the stones, her sorrowful eyes and the haunting voice that had called her name. She remembered her father's stories of the Banshee, how she would appear to warn those with O'Sullivan blood of approaching death. Her father had dismissed it as superstition, but now, with his death fresh in her mind, the fear crept closer. As midnight approached, the whispering returned, drifting through her open window. This time, the voice was unmistakable, a low, keening wail that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The mournful sound pulled her from bed, leading her to the front door. Outside, the mist had thickened, and in the distance, the stone circle seemed to pulse with a faint otherworldly glow. Drawn as though by an invisible force, Niamh returned to the circle, her heart racing. The figure was waiting for her, standing tall among the stones, her face hidden beneath a dark veil. Niamh gathered her courage, stepping forward. "Are you the Banshee?" The figure nodded slowly, lifting her veil to reveal eyes brimming with ancient sorrow. Her voice was soft, yet filled with an eerie power. "I am bound to the blood of the O'Sullivans, to warn them of death. I came for your father, and now, I come for you." Niamh's heart sank, the weight of the words pressing down on her. Why is our family cursed?" The Banshee's gaze softened. "Long ago, your ancestors wronged me, casting me aside for greed. I was bound to their line, forced to warn each one of their deaths as a cruel reminder of their betrayal." Tears pricked Niamh's eyes, the sorrow in the Banshee's voice overwhelming. "Is there no way to end it?" to free you from this curse." The banshee looked away, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "To break the bond, a life must be freely offered, and O'Sullivan must choose to remain with me, bound to the stones, so I may finally find peace." Niamh understood the cost immediately. She would have to give up her life, her dreams, to end the suffering that haunted her family and the restless spirit of the banshee. The choice weighed on her, but she couldn't ignore the banshee's sorrowful gaze. She thought of her father, of the generations who had lived under the shadow of the curse, and she felt a surge of courage. "If my life will bring you peace, then I will stay," she whispered, her voice steady. The banshee's eyes filled with gratitude, and she took Niamh's hand, her touch icy and ethereal. "Thank you, child. Your sacrifice will release us both." As Niamh felt her strength drain, a sense of calm washed over her. She knew she had done what her ancestors had failed to do, bringing an end to the curse that had haunted her family for centuries. The banshee began to sing, a haunting, lilting melody that filled the air, carrying Niamh's spirit into the mist. The stones glowed brighter, as if acknowledging the peace that had finally come to the restless spirit. In the days that followed, Padraig found the stone circle untouched, save for a new carving in the largest stone, a single spiraling mark, as though left by a hand. The whispering had ceased, and the villagers noticed that the stones were quieter, the air lighter. Padraig, remembering Niamh's face and her dedication to the past, knew that she had fulfilled an ancient promise, her spirit lingering in the stones, a silent guardian over her family's legacy. And on misty nights, when the wind swept over the hills, villagers sometimes thought they heard a faint melody, a reminder of Niamh's final choice and the peace she had brought to the restless spirit. In The Whispering Stones, we follow Niamh's journey through family secrets, curses, and sacrifice, woven with the mournful presence of the banshee. Her decision to stay binds her to the land, but it brings peace to her family and to the ghostly figure long tied to their legacy. This tale explores the price of redemption and the haunting beauty of Irish folklore, leaving an echo of Niamh's sacrifice among the stones and the mist. The village of Ballymur was nestled in a valley at the foot of Cayley Hill, a place where the mist hung thick and heavy, clinging to the ground even on the brightest days. Owen had visited as a child, but after his mother's passing, he returned to settle her affairs and close up the family cottage for good. It was meant to be a quick, somber visit, but the locals had other plans. One evening, Owen sat in the dimly lit pub, nursing a pint as Aoife, a local historian and his mother's friend, took the seat beside him. "So, you'll be heading up to Cayley Hill?" she asked, her tone more grave than curious. Owen raised an eyebrow. "Not planning on it. Just here to sort things out at the cottage." Aoife leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your family's got ties to that hill, Owen. Have you never heard of the curse?" Owen chuckled, shaking his head. "I grew up in Dublin, Aoife. I didn't hear many ghost stories about hills." But Aoife's face remained serious. "The banshee walks that hill. She's bound to the O'Driscoll family blood, warning of death before it comes. Your mother feared her. Said she'd heard her call once, just before your father passed." Owen's skepticism was firm, but a faint childhood memory tugged at him, of his mother's voice, low and fearful, warning him never to go near the hill. Shrugging it off, Owen finished his drink, but as he walked back to the cottage that night, the mist rolled in thicker than before, and he could swear he heard something, a faint, chilling wail on the wind. The next day, curiosity got the better of him, and despite Aoife's warning, Owen made his way toward Cayley Hill. The path was overgrown, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. He climbed higher, the fog swallowing him as he neared the hilltop. As he reached the summit, he noticed an odd circle of stones, half buried and covered in moss. At the center of the circle stood an ancient gnarled tree, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal arms. Owen shivered as he moved closer, the silence pressing down on him. Just then, a soft whisper broke the stillness, drifting through the fog. He strained to hear, but the words were lost. Another whisper followed, clearer this time, a faint sorrowful sound, like the weeping of a woman. Owen's heart raced as he glanced around, but no one was there. The fog seemed to swirl, growing thicker and more oppressive, and within it, he saw the faint outline of a figure, A woman, her hair wild, her face hidden beneath a shadowy veil. The figure lifted her head, her gaze piercing through the fog, and Owen felt a deep, unshakable dread. He stumbled back, his foot catching on a stone, and he turned, rushing back down the hill. By the time he returned to the cottage, he was breathless, his mind spinning with questions. Yet the fear in his heart lingered, the image of the woman's haunting gaze etched in his memory. That night, Owen tried to sleep, but the mournful wail returned, drifting through his open window. It was closer this time, louder, filling the room with an unearthly sorrow. Unable to ignore it, he threw on a coat and made his way back to Cayley Hill, feeling as though he were being pulled by an invisible force. The fog was thicker than ever, swirling around him as he climbed. When he reached the circle of stones, the figure appeared again, standing beneath the twisted tree, her face pale and ghostly, her eyes filled with sadness. "Why do you call me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The woman raised a hand, her voice soft, yet filled with a sorrow that made his heart ache. "You are of O'Driscoll blood. I am bound to your family, to warn of death and misfortune." Owen took a step back, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "What do you want from me?" The banshee's gaze darkened, and she reached out her hand. "Long ago your ancestors wronged me, leaving me bound to them in death. I am cursed to walk this hill, to mourn each O'Driscoll as they pass." Owen's mind raced as he tried to piece together the history his family had kept hidden. How can I end this?" A flicker of hope crossed the banshee's face. "To break the curse, one of your blood must offer their life willingly, freeing me from my suffering." Owen felt a chill as her words sank in. He would have to sacrifice himself to end the curse, to free his family from the banshee's mournful watch. Owen's heart pounded as he weighed his choice. If he left, he could escape the curse, but it would pass to another family member, haunting them just as it had haunted him. Or he could stay, break the curse, and bring peace to his family, and to the banshee. Taking a deep breath, he looked into her sorrowful eyes. "I will stay," he whispered, "if it will bring you peace." The banshee's face softened, and she reached out, brushing his forehead with a hand as cold as the mist. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice like a gentle breeze. "Your sacrifice will end my suffering and yours." As her touch lingered, Owen felt his strength slipping away, a strange calm filling him as the fog thickened, wrapping around him like a shroud. The banshee's song echoed one last time, rising in a soft, haunting melody that drifted across the hill. When dawn broke, Aoife and the villagers found Owen's empty cottage, his belongings untouched, his car still parked outside. No one saw him again, but the villagers whispered of the mist on Cayley Hill that lingered longer than usual, thick and heavy, as though it mourned his passing. They say that on foggy nights, if you stand on Cayley Hill, you might hear a soft song in the distance, a reminder of the young man who broke the banshee's curse, his sacrifice echoing in the mist, a part of the hill forever. The fog of Cayley Hill tells a story of family secrets, sacrifice, and the haunting legacy of Irish folklore. Owen's journey reveals the weight of his family's curse and his selfless choice to break it. The tale leaves a lingering chill as the mist on Cayley Hill holds the memory of the banshee's last lament and Owen's final act of redemption, a reminder of the lasting bonds between the living and the lost. The wind swept through the valley like a morning wail, chilling to the bone as it wove between the ancient oaks and the stone walls of the small Irish village of Ardnaglass. It was a quiet place, mostly untouched by the modern world, where traditions ran deep and old stories were told around flickering fires. One such story was that of the Banshee, a spectral figure said to herald death with her haunting cry. The autumn sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that crept across the earth. It was the time of year when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, and folk tales took on an air of unsettling truth. Among the villagers, there was one who had always been drawn to these stories, Aisling O'Reilly, a spirited girl with fiery red hair, and a curiosity that often got her into trouble. Despite the warnings of her elders, Aisling loved to explore the Glen of Ahurlo, a secluded area that seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. The glen was said to be the domain of the Banshee, where her cries could be heard echoing through the trees on quiet nights. The villagers told tales of a beautiful woman in a flowing white dress, her face pale and eyes filled with sorrow, who wept for those about to die. One crisp evening, Aisling gathered her courage and decided to venture into the glen at dusk. With only a lantern to guide her way, she felt the thrill of the unknown pulling her forward. As she stepped onto the narrow path lined with wildflowers, a sense of foreboding washed over her, but she dismissed it as mere superstition. Just a story, she murmured to herself, shaking off the chill that ran down her spine. As she walked deeper into the glen, the light from her lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on her mind. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled branches forming twisted faces that watched her with hollow eyes. Aisling swallowed hard and pressed on, her heart racing with excitement and fear. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the glen, snuffing out her lantern and plunging her into darkness. Panic rose in her chest, and she fumbled for the matches in her pocket, her hands trembling as she struck one against the rough fabric. The tiny flame illuminated her surroundings, revealing twisted roots and fallen branches, but there was something else, an unsettling sound, like a mournful wail, drifting through the air. Aisling's breath caught in her throat. It was just the wind, she told herself, but the sound grew louder, echoing through the trees. It was a woman's voice, high and keening, filled with sorrow and despair. The banshee. She thought the stories were true. Heart pounding, she turned to flee, but the darkness pressed in around her, suffocating and disorienting. As she stumbled down the path, the wailing grew louder, morphing into a cacophony of cries that seemed to come from all directions. "No, please," she gasped, adrenaline surging through her veins as she sprinted toward the entrance of the glen. Just as she thought she had escaped, she skidded to a halt. A figure stood before her, shrouded in shadow. The air grew heavy, the scent of damp earth and decay filling her nostrils. The flickering match illuminated the figure, revealing a woman with long, flowing hair the color of midnight, her pale skin luminescent in the dim light. Aisling's heart raced as she recognized the banshee from the tales. The woman's eyes were dark pools of sorrow, and her mouth was set in a silent scream. Aisling stumbled back, the match flickering dangerously low, but the banshee raised a hand, and the wailing ceased. "Child of the living," the banshee spoke, her voice like the rustle of autumn leaves. "Why do you trespass in my domain?" I didn't mean to disturb you," Aisling stammered, her mind racing with fear. "I was just curious." The banshee's expression softened, and for a moment, Aisling saw a flicker of humanity in her gaze. "Curiosity can lead to peril, young one. I am bound to this place, forever mourning the lost souls of those who are to perish. Do you not fear what you might awaken?" I don't believe in it," Aisling whispered, though her voice trembled. The banshee let out a soft sigh, and the air around them thickened. "Belief has little power against fate. Your curiosity is noble, but heed my warning. Death comes to those who wander too far into the unknown." Just then, a low rumble echoed in the distance, like thunder rolling across the hills. Aisling's heart raced. "I must go," she cried, turning to flee, but the banshee stepped forward, blocking her path. "Your time has not yet come, but do not take my words lightly. Listen, for I will grant you a gift, an insight into the fragility of life. You must cherish each moment, for the end can come unexpectedly." Aisling blinked, confusion clouding her mind. "What do you mean?" The banshee waved her hand, and suddenly, Aisling felt a rush of images flood her mind. Visions of loved ones, laughter echoing in the air, and moments of joy intertwined with sorrow. She saw her family, her mother's warm embrace, and the way her father's laughter would fill the room. But then the images twisted into darkness, faces twisted in pain, cries of despair ringing in her ears. "No," Aisling gasped, staggering back. "Please, I don't want to see this." The banshee's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. "It is not for you to choose. Life and death dance a fragile waltz. Remember this vision, child, and let it guide your steps." With that, the banshee's form began to fade, her features dissolving into the mist. The wailing returned, now a distant echo, and Aisling found herself standing alone in the glen, the lantern's light flickering back to life. She stumbled away from the glen, her heart pounding as the reality of what she had witnessed crashed over her like a wave. The weight of the banshee's words settled heavily on her chest. Days turned into weeks, and the encounter lingered in Aisling's mind. She became more attuned to the world around her, cherishing the moments spent with her family and friends. Yet, a shadow hung over her heart, an unshakable fear of the future. One evening, as she walked home from the village market, she noticed an unfamiliar silence enveloping the air. The sun hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows that stretched across the path. A sense of dread gnawed at her stomach, and she hurried her pace. When she reached her cottage, she found her mother sitting by the hearth, a pained expression on her face. Aisling's heart sank as she rushed to her side. "What's wrong, Aisling?" her mother said, voice trembling. "It's your father. He hasn't come home." Aisling felt the world tilt beneath her. The image of the banshee flashed through her mind, and the chilling memory of the cries echoed in her ears. "He'll be back. He must be delayed," she insisted, though doubt clawed at her throat. Hours turned into an agonizing night. The winds outside howled, and the rain pounded against the windows like a relentless specter. Aisling couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that enveloped her. As dawn broke, her father's absence weighed heavily on her heart. She ventured into the village, her pulse racing with each step. The whispers of the villagers reached her ears. A rumor of a terrible accident in the hills, of a man lost to the treacherous path. "No, it can't be true," Aisling cried, panic surging within her. She raced back home, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mother met her at the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Aisling, they found him," she choked out. "Your father, he's gone." The words shattered Aisling's world, a hollow pain radiating from her chest. The banshee's warning echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life. She collapsed to the ground, grief consuming her as the reality set in. Days passed and the village mourned. Aisling found herself lost in the depths of despair, consumed by guilt and unanswered questions. She couldn't escape the haunting memories of her father's laughter and warmth, now replaced by an emptiness that felt insurmountable. One evening, unable to bear the weight of her sorrow, Aisling returned to the glen. The trees loomed overhead, shrouded in mist, and the air was thick with an otherworldly energy. She stood at the entrance, her heart pounding as she recalled the banshee's warning. "Show yourself," Aisling cried into the darkness, her voice echoing through the trees. "I need to understand. Why did you show me my father's fate?" Silence enveloped her, and for a moment she feared she was alone. Then, the familiar wail began to drift through the glen, chilling her to the bone. Aisling's heart raced as the figure materialized before her, the banshee's presence tangible in the air. "You've returned, child of the living," the banshee said, her voice soft yet filled with the weight of sorrow. "You seek answers. Why did you let him die?" Aisling demanded, her voice trembling with anger and grief. "You could have warned me." The banshee's gaze was filled with a deep understanding. "I cannot alter the threads of fate. Your father's time had come, and I can only mourn those who are lost. But you must learn to embrace the gift of life he gave you." Aisling felt a wave of anguish wash over her, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "What am I supposed to do now? How can I move on?" The banshee stepped closer, her eyes filled with an ancient wisdom. "To honor his memory, you must live fully. Each moment is precious. Cherish the laughter, the love, and the fleeting beauty of existence. Do not allow sorrow to consume you." As the banshee spoke, Aisling felt a warmth enveloping her, a flicker of hope igniting within the depths of her despair. "But it hurts," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It will always hurt," the banshee replied. "But through that pain, you can find strength. Life and death are intertwined. It is in this cycle that we discover our true selves." The glen began to shimmer, the mist swirling around them. Aisling felt a sense of clarity wash over her, as the banshee's words sank deep into her heart. "I understand," she murmured, her voice steadier now. "I will remember him, and I will cherish every moment." With a sad smile, the banshee nodded. "Then my work here is done. Remember, child, your choices shape your destiny. Embrace life with all its beauty and sorrow." As the banshee faded into the mist, Aisling felt a newfound strength coursing through her veins. The cries that once echoed in her ears transformed into whispers of hope. She left the glen, the weight of sorrow still heavy on her heart, but a spark of determination ignited within her. In the days that followed, Aisling honored her father's memory by living fully. She embraced each moment, cherishing the laughter of her mother and the warmth of her friends. Though the pain of loss remained, it transformed into a bittersweet reminder of the love that once filled her life. Years passed, and the stories of the Banshee became woven into the fabric of her existence. Aisling grew into a woman, forever touched by the ethereal spirit who had shown her the beauty of life amidst the sorrow of death. The village continued to whisper tales of the Banshee, but Aisling understood the truth behind the legend, that within every cry was a reminder to live, to love, and to honor the fleeting moments that defined their lives. And so, the whispers in the glen became a melody of hope, a testament to the enduring power of love that transcended even the darkest of sorrows. This story encompasses the elements of horror and emotion found in the Banshee legend, while exploring themes of life, loss, and resilience. If you need anything adjusted or expanded, let me know. The village of Glenmore lay nestled in a hollow between ancient hills, a place where time seemed to stand still, and the old ways lingered like morning mist. The air was thick with legends, stories told and retold by the flickering glow of peat fires. Among these tales, none was more feared than that of the Banshee, a spectral woman whose wailing heralded death, her mournful cries echoing through the glens at night. It was said that to hear her lament was a sign that a loved one would soon depart from this world. The villagers honored the tales, keeping their doors locked at night and lighting candles for the dead. But in Glenmore, there was one family that had become indifferent to the legends. The O'Connors, a once revered lineage, had fallen on hard times and lost their respect in the eyes of the villagers. Ewan O'Connor, the youngest son, was known for his reckless spirit and disdain for the old traditions. He often scoffed at the warnings of the elders, dismissing the Banshee's cries as mere wind. Superstitions, he would laugh, mere stories to frighten children. His elder sister, Maeve, had tried to reason with him, recalling their mother's tales of the Banshee, but Ewan had no patience for such foolishness. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the village, Ewan wandered through the misty fields, his laughter ringing through the quiet night. He felt invincible, untethered to the fears that bound the hearts of the villagers. As darkness fell, he made his way to the old stone circle, a place long abandoned, rumored to be where the Banshee once roamed. The stone circle stood tall and weathered, an ancient relic of a time when the village was steeped in magic and reverence. Ewan stepped inside, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet. "If the Banshee is real, let her come," he taunted, his voice echoing against the stones. "I am not afraid." At that moment, the wind shifted, and a chill washed over him. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by an uneasy feeling that crawled up his spine. As he turned to leave, a mournful wail pierced the night, a sound so raw and heart-wrenching that it seemed to pull at the very fabric of his being. It was the Banshee. "Stop it," he shouted, forcing bravado into his voice, but the wail only grew louder, enveloping him like a shroud. He stumbled backward, terror gripping him as the sound filled the air with sorrow. "It's just the wind," he shouted, though he could feel the primal fear deep within him. The wailing ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Ewan stood frozen, heart racing. "Just a trick of the mind," he muttered to himself, shaking his head as he backed away from the stones. But as he turned, he felt a presence behind him, a shadow that flickered at the edge of his vision. He whirled around, but there was nothing there. Determined to prove his courage, he stepped back toward the circle. "Show yourself," he demanded. Silence met his words, and he felt foolish. Perhaps the stories were just that, stories. Suddenly, the wail returned, louder than before, echoing through the hills and resonating in his bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a cry of anguish that clawed at his heart. Ewan's bravado faltered, and he turned to run, sprinting toward the village, fear driving his legs faster than they had ever carried him before. As he reached the edge of Glenmore, breathless and wild-eyed, he found Maeve waiting for him. "Ewan, what happened?" she gasped, her eyes wide with concern. He stammered, struggling to catch his breath. "I heard her. I heard the Banshee." Maeve's face went pale, You went to the stone circle, didn't you? She whispered, fear lacing her words. You shouldn't have done that. It was just a sound, he replied, though the conviction in his voice wavered. Just the wind, right? Ewan, she said softly, her eyes locking onto his. You need to heed the stories. The banshee comes to warn us. When she cries, it is a sign of death. Ewan brushed her off, anger flaring within him. You're still clinging to these silly tales, Maeve. I refuse to be afraid of something that isn't real. That night, the house was filled with a tense silence. Ewan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, the memory of the banshee's wail echoing in his mind. He tried to convince himself that it was just a figment of his imagination, but sleep evaded him as the chill of her cry lingered in the corners of his mind. Days turned to weeks, and the incident faded from Ewan's memory, buried under the weight of daily life. He worked alongside the villagers, laughing and drinking, confident that he had banished the shadow of fear that had haunted him that night. But Maeve watched him closely, her heart heavy with dread. Then one fateful evening, news spread through Glenmore like wildfire. Old Liam, the village's wise man, had fallen ill. His condition worsened, and soon the village gathered to support his family. Ewan's heart sank at the news. Old Liam had been like a second father to him, teaching him the ways of the land and the tales of their ancestors. As Ewan visited Liam's home, he felt the weight of impending loss in the air. The elder's family was distraught, whispering prayers for his recovery, but Ewan felt a deep sense of foreboding. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard it again, the mournful wail of the banshee. It slithered through the cracks in the walls, wrapping around him like a serpent. Panic gripped him as he shot up in bed, realizing the truth. The cry was not a warning for himself, but a herald of death for someone he loved. He rushed to Maeve's room, banging on the door. Maeve, the banshee is here. It's for old Liam. Maeve opened the door, her eyes wide with fear. What do you mean? What did you hear? The wail. She's warning us. We must go to him. Ewan cried, urgency lacing his voice. Without hesitation, they raced through the darkened streets of Glenmore, guided by the cries of the banshee that echoed in their minds. When they reached old Liam's house, the door stood ajar, and the air inside was thick with sorrow. The family was gathered around the elder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ewan and Maeve moved to his side, and Ewan took old Liam's hand in his. Please, Liam, hold on, he pleaded. But the old man's eyes fluttered open, filled with a distant light. Ewan, he whispered, his voice a fragile echo. The banshee, she comes for me. I've heard her cries. Ewan felt his heart twist in anguish. No, not yet. You're strong, you can fight this. Old Liam smiled weakly. Child, it is my time. The banshee's wail is a part of life and death. Remember her song. It is a reminder to cherish what you have. Tears streamed down Ewan's face as he clung to the old man's hand. I can't lose you, he sobbed. But old Liam's breath slowed, the warmth of life fading from his grasp. With one final sigh, he closed his eyes, and Ewan felt the weight of the banshee's cry resound through his heart, a mournful lament that reverberated with loss. As the family wept, Maeve placed a hand on Ewan's shoulder. We must honor him, she said, her voice trembling. He deserves to be remembered. The next few days were a blur of grief and heartache. Ewan felt hollow, haunted by the loss of the only father figure he had known. The village mourned together, sharing stories and memories, but Ewan was unable to escape the shadow of the banshee. He became a shell of himself, drifting through the days in a fog of sorrow. One night, as he lay in bed, the wailing returned, echoing through the silence of his home. This time he didn't resist. The sound filled him with a profound sadness, a connection to those who had departed. He rose from his bed and followed the cry, stepping into the night, compelled by the call of the banshee. He wandered to the edge of the village, toward the stone circle, where it had all begun. The moon hung high above, casting an ethereal glow on the ancient stones. As he entered the circle, the air shifted, and he felt the presence of the banshee, the chill wrapping around him like a cloak. Why do you call me? He asked, voice trembling. Is it more loss? More death? A figure emerged from the mist, her features illuminated by the moonlight, pale skin, flowing hair, and eyes filled with sorrow. Ewan O'Connor, she said softly, her voice a haunting melody. You have come to understand the truth of my song. I wish to forget, he confessed, his heart aching. I wish to escape this pain. The banshee shook her head, the sorrow in her gaze deepening. Pain is a part of life, child. It shapes us, teaches us to love and to remember. The wailing you hear is not just for the dead. It is a reminder to cherish every moment. But how can I live with this? With the weight of loss? Yuan cried, desperation flooding his voice. Honor those who have gone, she replied. Keep their memories alive in your heart. It is through remembrance that they remain with you, and through love that you find healing. Yuan felt tears streaming down his face as the banshee's words sank in. In that moment he understood. The wailing was not just a cry of sorrow but a celebration of life, a connection to those who had loved him. I will remember, he promised, his heart swelling with resolve. I will cherish them. With that promise, the banshee smiled, a glimmer of warmth breaking through the sorrow in her eyes. Then you will find peace, child of the living. As dawn broke, the first rays of light pierced through the mist, illuminating the stone circle. Yuan stood alone, the weight of grief still heavy but transformed. He would carry the memories of old Liam, his laughter and wisdom, and the love he had shared with his family. From that day on, Yuan embraced the stories of the banshee. He no longer scoffed at the old tales but shared them with others, reminding the villagers of the importance of love and remembrance. He understood that death was not an end, but a continuation of the bond they shared with those who had passed. Years later, on the eve of the harvest festival, Yuan stood by the hearth, surrounded by friends and family. The fire crackled, and laughter filled the air as he recounted the tale of the banshee and old Liam. As the night wore on, a soft breeze stirred the air, and a familiar wail drifted through the open window, a sound filled with sorrow and beauty. But instead of fear, Yuan felt a sense of peace. He looked out into the night, the stars twinkling like distant memories, and whispered a prayer for those who had come before him. The banshee's song would forever echo in his heart, a reminder that love transcended even death. In Glenmore, the legends continued to be told, but Yuan's story became one of hope and resilience, a testament to the strength of love that could endure even in the face of loss. This story captures the essence of the Banshee legend while exploring themes of life, death, and the importance of cherishing memories. If you need any adjustments or additional details, feel free to ask. In the heart of County Kerry, the village of Dunmore lay cloaked in legends, the most feared among them being that of the Banshee. A figure of sorrow and foreboding, she was said to appear before the death of a loved one, her haunting wail echoing through the hills and glens. Villagers spoke of her in hushed tones, their hearts heavy with the weight of those who had come before them. But they also whispered tales of a family that had forgotten the old ways, a family destined for tragedy. The O'Sullivans were once the pride of Dunmore, known for their bravery and strength. But after the death of the matriarch Mairead O'Sullivan, the family had grown distant, caught in a web of grief that twisted their hearts and dulled their spirits. Her children, Declan the eldest and Niamh the youngest, struggled under the weight of their loss, and their father Sean became a ghost of his former self, consumed by sorrow. One cold autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the sky, Niamh wandered into the woods near their home. The trees loomed tall and ancient, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. She felt a pull towards the depths of the woods, an inexplicable urge to seek solace among the trees, hoping to hear her mother's voice once more. As she ventured deeper into the woods, a thick fog rolled in, wrapping around her like a shroud. Niamh shivered, the dampness seeping into her bones. She paused, her heart racing as she listened to the stillness around her. It felt wrong, as if the world held its breath waiting. Suddenly, a mournful wail pierced the silence, slicing through the fog like a blade. It was the unmistakable cry of the banshee, and it sent a chill racing down Niamh's spine. "No," she cried, her voice trembling. "It can't be. Not my family." Frantically, she turned to flee, the fog swirling around her, obscuring her path. She stumbled over roots and rocks, the sound of the banshee's wail echoing in her ears, growing louder and more insistent. "Mairead!" she shouted, desperate to call her mother back from the shadows. "Please don't take anyone else." As Niev raced through the trees, she felt the presence of something behind her, a shadowy figure lurking just out of sight. Panic surged within her, urging her to run faster, but the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet, and she lost her footing, tumbling to the forest floor. The wailing stopped abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Niev lay there, gasping for breath, fear coursing through her veins. "Get up," she urged herself, shaking off the disorientation. But as she pushed herself to her feet, she heard it again, the soft rustle of leaves, the sound of something approaching. With a heart full of dread, she turned to face the noise, her pulse pounding in her ears. The fog thickened, swirling around her, and from its depths emerged a figure, tall and ethereal, draped in a cloak of mist. The banshee stood before her, her face obscured, but her presence was overwhelming, a weight pressing down on Niev's chest. "Who are you?" Niev managed to croak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am the harbinger of sorrow," the banshee replied, her voice low and melodic, yet filled with anguish. "I come to mourn those who have been lost. Please," Niev begged, "don't take anyone else. My family has suffered enough." The banshee's gaze pierced through the fog, her eyes shimmering like silver in the moonlight. "It is not my choosing, child. I am but a messenger, bound to the cycle of life and death. Your family has forgotten the old ways, and now they must pay the price." Niev felt her heart clench. "What do you mean? We've mourned. We've remembered." "Remembrance is not enough," the banshee replied, her voice echoing through the trees. "Your family must honor the dead with more than tears. They must embrace the connection to those who have passed." With a wave of her hand, the banshee conjured a vision in the fog, a swirling mist that took shape, revealing glimpses of her mother Mairead, laughing and dancing, the warmth of her love radiating like sunlight. Niev's heart ached at the sight, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mama!" she cried out, reaching toward the apparition. But the vision faded, swallowed by the fog. "No, come back. The path forward is fraught with pain," the banshee intoned, her voice softening. "But it is through that pain that your family can find healing. They must remember you, Niev. They must not allow grief to consume them." "What must I do?" Niev asked, desperation clawing at her throat. "Tell me, please." "Return to them," the banshee said. "Help them honor your mother's memory. They must gather together, share stories, and allow the light of her spirit to guide them. Only then will they be free from my wail." With those words, the banshee began to fade, the mist swirling around her. "Do not fear me, child. Embrace the sorrow, for it is a part of life. Remember that love never truly dies." As the fog thickened and the banshee disappeared, Niev felt a surge of determination. She raced back through the woods, her heart pounding with purpose. The banshee's warning echoed in her mind as she pushed through the trees, desperate to save her family from the grip of despair. When she arrived home, the house was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from a flickering candle in the window. She rushed inside, her heart racing. "Declan, father," she called, urgency lacing her voice. Her brother appeared in the doorway, his expression weary and filled with grief. "Niev, where have you been? We were worried." "I saw her," Niev gasped, breathless. "The banshee. She came to me in the woods." Declan's face paled. "You're not serious. You didn't listen to her, did you? She said we must honor Mama's memory." Niev cried, desperation flooding her voice. "We've been grieving alone, and it's tearing us apart. We need to come together, share stories, and remember her the way she deserves." Sean emerged from the shadows, his eyes hollow and filled with despair. "What nonsense is this?" he muttered, shaking his head. "The banshee is just a tale to frighten children. It's not nonsense." Niev shouted, her voice rising. "If we don't remember her the right way, we will lose more than just memories. We could lose each other." For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick with tension. Then slowly Declan stepped forward. "Perhaps she's right, father. We've been so consumed by our grief that we've forgotten how to celebrate her life." Sean's gaze softened, the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crack. "What do you suggest, Niev?" he asked, his voice weary. "We should gather here tomorrow evening," Niev said, her voice steadier now. "We'll light candles, share stories, and remember Mama in a way that honors her spirit." Declan nodded, and Sean sighed, the weight of sorrow still heavy on his shoulders. but the flicker of hope ignited within him. "Very well," he said quietly. "We will do as you say." The next evening, the house was filled with warmth and light as Niev, Declan, and Sean gathered around the table, candles flickering in the dim light. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, and for the first time in months, they felt a sense of togetherness. Niev began to speak, her voice trembling but resolute. "Mama loved to tell stories," she said, a smile breaking through her tears. "Do you remember the one about the river spirit? She always said it was a lesson about finding joy in every moment." Declan chuckled softly, the sound warming the air. "She would tell it every spring when the flowers bloomed. It made me believe that magic existed in the world." As they shared their memories, the weight of sorrow began to lift. Sean spoke of Mairead's laughter, the way it would fill their home like music, and Niev recalled the evenings spent baking bread with her mother, the sweet scent wafting through the air. Hours passed as they laughed and cried, the flickering candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. In those moments, the bond of family began to mend, weaving together the threads of their hearts. But as the night deepened, a chill settled in the air, and the familiar wail of the banshee drifted through the open window. The sound was mournful yet transformed, filled with a sense of peace. "Do you hear her?" Niev whispered, her heart pounding. "She's not here to take anyone else. She's here to guide us." Declan nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "She's telling us we did the right thing. We've honored Mama." Sean's expression softened as he listened, the echoes of grief giving way to a sense of understanding. "I feel her presence with us," he murmured, the weight of despair lifting from his shoulders. As the wail faded into the night, the O'Sullivans sat in silence, the warmth of love enveloping them like a comforting embrace. They understood now that the banshee was not a harbinger of doom, but a reminder of the connections that transcended death. Days turned into weeks, and the family continued to honor Mairead's memory, sharing stories and laughter. The banshee's wail became a symbol of their love, a reminder that while loss was painful, it was also a part of life's tapestry. One evening, as Niev walked through the woods near their home, she paused at the edge of the trees. The fog rolled in, but instead of fear, she felt a sense of calm. "Thank you," she whispered to the night, "for showing us the way." As the moon shone down, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and for a fleeting moment, Niev felt a presence beside her, a warmth that wrapped around her like a mother's embrace. In that instant, she knew her mother's spirit would always be with her, guiding her through the shadows of life. Years later, the O'Sullivan family remained a fixture in Dunmore, their laughter and love echoing through the village. The banshee, once a figure of dread, became a symbol of hope, reminding them that life was a delicate balance of joy and sorrow, and that love transcended even the darkest of nights. In the heart of the woods, the echoes of Mairead's laughter mingled with the whispers of the wind, creating a melody that would resonate through the generations. And as the villagers continued to tell the tale of the banshee, they spoke of the O'Sullivans, not just as a family marked by loss, but as a family who learned to embrace the light within the darkness. This story explores themes of grief, remembrance, and the enduring nature of love, encapsulating the essence of the banshee legend. If you'd like to make any changes, or if you have specific elements you want included, just let me know. In the secluded village of Kilbane, nestled between rolling hills and shadowy woods, the legend of the banshee haunted the hearts of its inhabitants. It was said that the wail of the banshee echoed through the valley before a death, warning of loss and sorrow to come. The villagers held their breath when the winds howled, fearful that the mournful cry would herald the end of a loved one. Amidst the whispers of the banshee lived the Murphy family, known for their warmth and kindness. Thomas Murphy, a hardworking farmer, his wife Eileen, and their two children, Aisling and Liam, were the heart of the village. They welcomed neighbors into their home, sharing stories and laughter by the fire. Yet beneath the surface a shadow loomed. One bleak winter evening, the wind howled mercilessly, and snowflakes danced like phantoms in the air. Aisling, a bright-eyed girl of 13, sat by the fireplace, her fingers weaving together a scarf for her mother. The crackling flames cast flickering shadows on the walls, and she could hear her father singing softly in the kitchen, his voice filled with love. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and a chilling wail swept through the cracks of the old cottage. It was a sound filled with despair, a mournful cry that wrapped around Aisling like a shroud. Her heart raced as she exchanged glances with Liam, her younger brother, who had just come in from playing in the snow. "What was that?" Liam asked, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," Aisling whispered, her voice trembling. "But it sounded like the banshee." Their father's song faltered, and he rushed into the room, his face pale. "Stay close to me, children," he commanded, his voice firm but shaking. "The banshee is near. We must keep the fire burning bright." Eileen entered the room, her expression filled with concern. "What is it?" she asked, glancing between her husband and the children. "The banshee," Thomas said, his voice low. Her wail was heard. "It may mean trouble is coming." Aisling clutched the scarf in her hands, her heart pounding in her chest. The stories of the banshee haunted her dreams, and now it seemed they were becoming a reality. "But who will she come for?" she whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. "I don't know," Thomas replied, glancing toward the window as if expecting the figure to appear. "But we must stay together." That night, the wailing continued, rising and falling with the wind, each cry echoing through the village like a death knell. Aisling lay in bed, shivering under the covers, unable to close her eyes. The thought of the banshee lurking outside filled her with dread. "Mama," she whispered into the darkness, "please keep us safe." As dawn broke, the wailing faded into a haunting silence. Aisling awoke to the sound of her parents talking in hushed tones. She slipped out of bed, her heart heavy with the fear that had gripped her the night before. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Eileen looked at her with a forced smile, but Aisling could see the worry etched on her mother's face. "Yes, love. It was just the wind playing tricks on us," Eileen reassured her, but Aisling could tell she didn't truly believe it. Liam shuffled into the room, his hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep. "What did I miss?" he asked, yawning widely. "The banshee was here," Aisling whispered, glancing at her parents. "What's a banshee?" Liam asked innocently, blinking up at his sister. Before Aisling could respond, a knock echoed through the house, followed by the sound of footsteps on the porch. Thomas opened the door to find Seamus, their neighbor, his face pale and drawn. "Thomas, have you heard?" Seamus gasped, breathless with fear. "What is it?" Thomas asked, his heart sinking. "It's old Father O'Reilly. He's dead," Seamus said, his voice shaking. "Found him in his field this morning. They say the banshee's wail was heard before dawn." Aisling felt her breath catch in her throat, a sense of dread flooding her. Father O'Reilly had been a kind man, always sharing stories of the past and offering blessings to those in need. The thought of his death sent chills through her. "God rest his soul," Eileen whispered, crossing herself. "We must go pay our respects." The news spread like wildfire through Cobain, the villagers gathering to mourn the loss of Father O'Reilly. Aisling and Liam accompanied their parents to the church, the cold biting at their cheeks. As they walked, Aisling could feel the weight of grief hanging over the village like a heavy fog. When they arrived at the church, they found a gathering of mourners, their faces drawn with sorrow. Aisling stood beside her brother, clutching his hand tightly, as they offered their condolences to Father O'Reilly's family. The atmosphere was thick with despair, and Aisling felt the icy fingers of fear curling around her heart. That night, as they returned home, Aisling couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her. The banshee's wail lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder of the loss they had all experienced. She lay awake in bed, listening to the wind howl outside, each gust sending shivers down her spine. Days turned into weeks, and the village mourned Father O'Reilly, but the memory of the banshee's wail remained fresh in their minds. Whispers circulated about the next death, the villagers growing anxious and fearful, believing that the banshee's presence had not yet left them. One fateful night, the wind howled fiercely, rattling the windows of the Murphy home. Aisling sat by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. Eileen was in the kitchen preparing supper, and Liam was playing with his toys on the floor. Suddenly, the wail echoed through the village once more, rising like a mournful lament, filling Aisling's heart with dread. "Mama," she cried, jumping to her feet. "It's her! The banshee is back!" Eileen rushed into the room, her face pale as she glanced at Thomas. "We need to gather the children," she said urgently. "We must stay together." Just then, the door creaked open, and their neighbor, Mrs. Fitzpatrick, rushed in, her eyes wide with fear. "Thomas! Eileen! You need to come quick," she gasped. "What is it?" Thomas asked, his heart racing. "It's Liam," Mrs. Fitzpatrick cried, her voice trembling. "He's gone." "What do you mean he's gone?" Aisling shouted, panic gripping her throat. "Where is he?" "He was playing outside," Mrs. Fitzpatrick explained. "And now he's missing. We can't find him anywhere." Aisling's heart sank as the realization hit her. The wailing grew louder, wrapping around her like a dark cloud. "Liam," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Stay here," Thomas ordered as he rushed out the door, Eileen right behind him. Aisling hesitated, fear clawing at her heart. But she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She followed her parents into the night. The wind whipped around them as they called out for Liam, their voices lost in the tempest. The fog rolled in thick, obscuring the path as they ventured into the woods behind their home. Aisling felt the weight of dread settle heavily on her chest, the wail of the banshee echoing in her mind. "Liam," she shouted, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" Her parents called his name, their voices filled with desperation. Aisling's heart raced as they pushed deeper into the forest, the trees looming like specters in the night. The wail seemed to answer them, rising and falling, a ghostly lament that chilled her to the bone. "Liam!" Eileen cried, her voice filled with fear. "Please come back to us." Aisling's breath hitched as she stumbled upon a small clearing. The moonlight spilled through the branches, illuminating the fog that clung to the ground like a ghostly blanket. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, shrouded in mist, her long hair billowing like tendrils of smoke. "The banshee!" Aisling froze, terror coursing through her veins. "Liam!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the silence that enveloped them. The banshee turned, her gaze piercing through the fog. "You seek your brother," she said, her voice hauntingly beautiful. "But the price of grief is high. What have you done to him?" Aisling cried, her heart racing. "Please, I'll do anything. Your family has forgotten the songs of old, the memories that bind you," the banshee replied, her voice echoing through the clearing. "You must remember, or your loss will consume you. Let him go," Aisling begged, tears streaming down her face. "He's just a child. Then remember," the banshee whispered, her form shifting like smoke. "Honor those who have come before you, and perhaps you will find him." With that, the banshee faded into the fog, leaving Aisling alone in the clearing, her heart pounding with fear. "Liam!" she cried, desperation flooding her voice. "Please come back." Just then, her parents rushed into the clearing, their faces pale with fear. "Aisling!" Thomas shouted, pulling her close. "Where is he?" "I don't know." Aisling sobbed, her heart aching. "The banshee was here. She said we have to remember." Eileen knelt down, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We can't lose him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to honor his spirit." Aisling wiped her tears, determination flooding her heart. "We can remember Mama, and all the people we've lost. We can sing the songs she taught us." "Then let us do it together," Thomas said, his voice steady. "We will not let grief take our son." As the wind howled around them, the three of them formed a circle in the clearing, their hands clasped tightly together. Aisling took a deep breath, remembering her mother's voice as she sang the old songs, melodies that had been passed down through generations. With trembling voices, they began to sing, the haunting notes rising into the night, echoing through the trees. The wail of the banshee mingled with their song, becoming a part of the melody, intertwining with their voices as they poured their hearts into the music. The wind shifted, and Aisling felt a warm breeze brush against her cheek, a whisper of hope amidst the darkness. As they sang, the fog began to lift, revealing the outline of a small figure in the distance. "Liam!" Aisling cried, breaking away from her parents and running toward the shape. Liam stood there, shivering but unharmed, his eyes wide with confusion. "Aisling!" he shouted, relief flooding his voice. Aisling rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "Where were you?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "I was playing," Liam said, bewildered. "I thought I heard you calling." Eileen knelt beside them, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "You scared us, little one," she cried, pulling him into her embrace. As the family held each other, the banshee's wail echoed softly in the distance, a reminder of the sorrow that had brought them together. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united in their love and memories. That night, the Murphys returned home, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had faced, but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They gathered by the fire, lighting candles for Father O'Reilly and all those they had lost, singing the songs of their ancestors until dawn broke over the horizon. As the first light of morning crept into the cottage, Aisling felt a sense of peace wash over her. The banshee's presence lingered, no longer a harbinger of doom, but a reminder of the love that transcended even the deepest sorrow. In the years that followed, the legend of the banshee remained a part of Cobain, a cautionary tale passed down through generations. But for the Murphy family, it became a symbol of their strength, a testament to the bonds of love that could withstand the darkest of nights. And whenever the wind howled or the fog rolled in, they would gather together, sharing stories and songs, honoring the memories of those who had come before them, ensuring that their spirits would never be forgotten. This story explores themes of family, grief, and the enduring power of love, reflecting the essence of banshee folklore, while intertwining a narrative of hope and resilience. If you have any specific requests for adjustments or additional elements, feel free to let me know.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed the terror, like and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. Share your thoughts below. And remember, stay close to the light. Until next time, sleep tight if you can.